a consistent video 2 weeks in a row. That's crazy. But when I decided to do this iceberg, I didn't fully think, or like it just didn't dawn on me just how long it would take to go over all 250 of these people. Some of these specific cases are even of like 10 or 7 people in them. So I'm going to try to break it down by tier just because I don't want to make a 6-hour video when I'm just coming back, and I don't think you want to watch a video that's 6 hours long with me not fully knowing how I'm going to even edit these videos. So we're going to be starting first with first tier, shocker. And the list is color coded, which is kind of helpful. I don't, meh, it's whatever. So I'm going to quickly go over what these colors mean just so we can never have to talk about it ever again. So purple is going to be still missing. Orangish brownish, my eyes are weird, so whatever color you think that is. Declared or likely deceased. Green is found alive. And then red is found dead. Blue is a bit of a weird one because they have it as legitimately debatable. I don't really know what that means. I assume that means that it's debated whether they were alive, dead, or even existed, because that's what a lot of these seem to fall under. They kind of just fall on, they start to really borderline on the myth territory, which is fine. I don't really mind that. But it's one of those weird ones. And then the purple, oh not the purple, the green and red ones are a little weird just because for a missing iceberg, I guess you wouldn't assume that they would be found at all. I've seen some people on the Reddit that I found this on be a little weird about it. I don't personally, not that I don't care, but I think it's fine if like at some point they were missing, if that makes sense. But like I said, this iceberg is going to be tackled in parts by tier. So the next video, probably whenever that comes out, depending on my schedule. If I can't pump out the next one, I'll probably just throw in something else before that. But the next video will most likely be the next tier. And if not, then I'll just try to keep you guys updated. Bradford Bishop worked as a U.S. Foreign Services officer until he allegedly killed his wife, mother, and 3 sons in 1976. From what I could find, there was no definitive motive as to why he killed them, but the closest I could find was that he felt inadequate in not just his work, but in his life in general and at home life too. I guess those are the same, but you know. A coworker of his told authorities that Bishop would occasionally talk about his wife and mother talking down to him or saying things like he's going nowhere at work or that he's not good enough. This would provide a motive that kind of makes sense since the murders happened after he was passed up on for a promotion. And after learning that he wouldn't be getting promoted, Bishop reportedly left work way earlier than normal, went back and took all of his money out of a bank, went to buy gas and a hammer, and then filled up his station wagon, then went to a different place to buy a shovel and a pickaxe. After all that, he went home and allegedly committed the murders, starting with his wife, then mother, then kids. There is evidence that the rest of the stuff happened. It's just a little iffy on like, there's evidence, but it starts to fall under he said, she said type of evidence, depending on how like deep you go into it. But apparently Bishop drove almost 200 miles and then buried his family in a forest, then just dipped out. His station wagon was found sometime later, but he himself has never been seen again. And again, in terms of motive, I don't want to put too much weight into the wife and mom being these triggers for him just, you know, snapping and disappearing, because from what I read, a lot of that, like I said, is still just speculation and then he said, she said type of stuff. And it is based entirely on what he told people about his own home life. I'd rather not speak ill of the dead if there's nothing very substantial to prove it, because I don't want to sell this idea that they deserved whatever happened, because they don't, and we have no evidence that they did. They were kind of just legitimately just victims. So that's where I'm gonna leave that. There have been alleged sightings of him, but none that ever led to much discovery or much anything really. So as of right now, he's either still out there alive somewhere or he's dead. And considering he'd be in his 80s right now, there's genuine debate of whether he can actually even be alive at this point, if he was ever alive after he left. Because I did read some theories that after he killed them, he did go somewhere else. And, you know, but I couldn't find any concrete evidence about that, and it looks like it's just a theory to, I don't know, make the story more cool, I guess. I don't know. I looked into that for like an hour, and I could not find anything worth actually like talking about, aside from just mentioning it. I'm going to pronounce his name entirely horrible, but Scott Kleesholt went missing after a thunderstorm in 1988. He was last seen around 4 p.m. heading to an area the neighborhood kids would regularly play at. There are witnesses that say they saw him before the storm and after, which doesn't leave too much of an interval between when he was last seen and when his parents contacted the local police. And this is one of those particularly sad cases because that's all we know about what could have happened to him. There were a few glimmers of hope when there started to be a lot of anonymous tips leading to some places being searched, like a neighbor's house and other areas around where he was playing at. And a police informant actually provided a suspect that he fully believed to be the culprit. And then on top of that, in 2016, a Reddit post, I know, Reddit post, gross, but this Reddit post appeared to be a confession to Scott's murder. That's the interesting thing about that post, that it specifically tags this disappearance as a murder, if it is true. We'll get to that in a few seconds. The thing is, there's nothing that I just listed that ever led to any significant breakthroughs, because with the house the police searched, not much evidence was found there, if any at all. Quite literally nothing was found there, actually. And so, and again, with that informant, the guy he fully believed to be the culprit, nothing came of that. Nothing at all. And then with this Reddit post, there were a lot of things that kind of led to it most likely being about Scott's murder. Again, for this specific post, it would have to be murder. But the thing is that while, yes, his entire post perfectly lined up with what could have happened on that storm, and after people went digging through his Reddit profile, they saw that he was around that age based on some of his posts about like nostalgia type things, and he was in that area and still sort of lived near that area based on a lot of other posts he made in different, I forgot what they're called, like Reddit forums earlier. And so, yeah, it seems like the most viable like rabbit hole to go down in terms of figuring out what happened to him. But from what I could find, the police investigated it to its end and just didn't find anything that could help them either find a body or find Scott himself, or kind of just make any definitive decision on how this case is supposed to end. So there's no real evidence or no real breakthroughs coming out after that last sighting of him. And at the time, a lot of people just assumed he drowned in the flash flood. But according to his family and some police, they do believe he was kidnapped. As of right now, his case is still an unsolved one, which is extremely depressing because kids going missing always is extra sad more than anything else. Because this is a tier 1 of this list, a lot of these cases are going to be a little more well-known than others. Like, there are a few in here that I think really border on being a little unknown, but there's a good handful that are extremely well-known to the point where there's probably movies about them, or you probably learned about them in school. Brian Schaffer, I pronounce that so horribly, I'm very sorry. But this one's this is a pretty well-known case. I don't remember where or when I heard about this one, but as soon as I read this name, I recognized it immediately. I was a little foggy on the details, but I know I heard of it at some point. So Brian was a medical student who, after bar hopping with a friend, not my thing, but go off, he never comes home after that. He has 2 final sightings on security cam before his disappearance. The first shows him, his friend, and someone his friend invited going towards the entrance at 1:15 a.m. The next shows him outside talking to 2 girls at 1:55 a.m. After talking with them, he walks toward the bar and is never seen again. There's a handful of theories of what some people believe happened to Brian. One of them is that he got hurt in a nearby construction site. Another is that he left to start a new life. One of the weirder ones is that he is allegedly a homeless man in Mexico. There are images that I think were proven wrong, but that was one of them. But the thing is, a lot of Brian's close friends and family seem to firmly believe that whatever happened to him had to do with the friend he went out with that night. And out of everyone close to Brian, that friend is the only one who refused to take a polygraph. Again, not that that would prove anything, because those tests are historically inaccurate, but it's the principle that he refused to offer much help. He did offer help towards the beginning, but as the case started to fully get investigated, from what I'm aware of, his help started to slowly dwindle away. And as of right now, the only really genuine theory that could be the case is that he did get hurt in a construction site and just a body was never found because it's built into a foundation or something like that, which is very haunting and I hope is not the case. But of all the theories that people have and a lot of the theories that were ran through police, that is the only one that seems to be even close to possibly being legitimate. Marilyn Bergeron's disappearance is one of those eerie cases that I just don't like hearing about. I've heard about it before, and I think I watched an entire other video about it. I'll probably link it if I can find it. But it's just one of those where I hate this case. I really do. I feel like it would also be a lot lower if it wasn't this well known, just because of how eerie and creepy it is. Everything surrounding her disappearance is legitimately just strange. A lot of the weirdness of Marilyn's case starts when she was living in Montreal, but expressed to her parents that she wanted to return because she no longer felt safe and just wanted to go home, which is in Quebec. This feeling of fear she had came up a lot, and one of her friends mentioned that she had seemed distressed and generally not like herself 2 months prior. That's where the eeriness comes from, is because for 2 straight months she was afraid of something or someone coming after her, and they still cannot figure out what it is exactly. One of her friends had asked her if she'd been assaulted or witnessed something uneasy or anything, just asked for anything. And from that point on, all the way up until she went missing, no one ever got a straight answer about what was bothering her or who was bothering her. The best I got was her apparently saying to a friend, "You can't even begin to imagine what I've been through," and then promising to share this information once she felt safe. And that would never end up happening, since she went missing the morning after she finished moving back in with her parents. On the day she went missing, Marilyn apparently said to her parents that she was going for a walk and left with nothing but her credit card. CCTV footage shows her attempting to take out money from an ATM around 11 a.m. And according to her family, in this video footage, she looked extremely helpless, which I do not want to think about. In this footage, she was constantly looking backward at what they assume could have been a parked car or a person standing slightly off screen. And her last sighting was at a coffee shop around 4 p.m., 12 miles from her parents' house. Marilyn's last sighting was at a coffee shop 12 miles from her parents' house around 4 p.m. Her parents believe that she was driven there, since it isn't too far to walk, but it wouldn't make sense for her to go that far just for a coffee. 12 miles is... There has to be a reason that she is there specifically. And after being at this coffee shop and leaving, that is the last time she is ever confirmed to be seen again. There have been potential sightings afterward, most of which mention her being with an unidentified man, but none of the sightings have ever actually led to her being found or any definitive evidence of what happened to her. And as of right now, her case is pretty much still unsolved. And again, I hate this case. Everything about it makes me extremely uncomfortable. But all you can really do is just hope that at some point she will be found, hopefully alive and in the best condition possible. Tammy Lynn Leppard's disappearance is vaguely similar to Marilyn's, in that both felt unsafe prior to their disappearance. Tammy was an aspiring actress, so her situation is a little different, but according to those closest to her, after her debut movie, Spring Break, I haven't seen it, but I heard it's good. More specifically though, after a party that took place once the movie had wrapped filming, Tammy came back an entirely different person. She was said to be very paranoid and feeling as though someone was trying to kill her, which terrifying. And I've read some speculation that either she was suffering from severe schizophrenia or that she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to at that party. Tammy was admitted to psychiatric care, but they found no evidence that this was drug or alcohol induced, and after 72 hours they just had to release her. This, at least in my mind, is where the schizophrenia theory kind of dies, because if it were true, I'm 90% sure either they would have put her on medication or just not even allowed her to leave. I have really bad vision. I can't tell if this camera is blurry or not. Hold on. I genuinely do believe that if this was a mental illness kind of thing, they would have just kept her there as long as they could to figure out what the root of this is. The day after she was unfortunately released, Tammy reportedly went to the beach with a friend. They had a verbal argument. I wasn't able to find what exactly this argument was about. I've seen some snippets of what it could be about, but nothing that I feel... I heard a noise. But nothing that I feel was legitimate to just definitively say this is what they were arguing about. And after this argument, she was asked to be taken home. For one reason or another, that friend ended up dropping her off 5 miles from her house, and that's the last time she was ever seen alive. Following this theory that she saw something she wasn't supposed to, some people believe that she was put into witness protection, and I'd like to believe that, since it's the best worst outcome, and I'm gonna be very tiptoe my words here. It is strange that she was dropped off 5 miles from her house. I will not say anything definitive about the friend. I'm not even going to drop a name, which I have been dropping friend names anyway, but point being, I think it's strange. You can look into it yourself to see just what was said about why that happened or other things. Again, I just find it weird, and I'm going to leave that there. But I hope that the witness protection is the thing that happened, because I think that is, again, the best worst outcome, because it means she's safe and alive, and that's all you could really hope for. So we're just gonna pretend I didn't go leave to take a shower, even though that's a good thing. Showering's really good for you, but Point being, the disappearance of Michaela Bell occurred on April 12th, 2016, and to this day, there's never been any real lead or development in the case after the initial investigation that went after she was reported missing. But what differentiates Michaela's case from the ones earlier on this list is that we have a very clear timeline of everything she did the day she disappeared. We have CCTV footage and other witness accounts, all that show her pretty much at the start of her day, after her grandmother dropped her off at school, then leaving, almost immediately going, taking out some money at a bank. She then goes to a pawn shop to get some money for a ring, but they deny her just because of low value, because pawn shops, I don't know how they work. She then goes to a Wendy's / Tim Hortons duo restaurant. I have no idea what a Tim Hortons is, but yeah. And she gets there around 9 a.m. and stays there till about 10:45. You can see the cats fighting in the background. And her actions while she's there are a big part of where a ton of speculation comes from in terms of what exactly was going on. Because while she's at Wendy's, she does send a few messages, one where she asks a friend for help before saying, never mind, I don't need help. She then has several phone calls with someone that's never really been identified. We just have video of her on the phone, and people say like, oh yeah, she was on the phone a few times, things like that. So she exits this Wendy's Tim Hortons restaurant and then just does some circles around the restaurant before coming back in and sitting at a different table. And the last thing she did before leaving permanently was ask an old woman to help her book a hotel room, to which she refused, because what old woman is going to let a teenager book a hotel room? And then afterwards, she goes to a nearby bus station to basically just ask about a ticket. Michaela then sends a text to a friend about meeting for lunch, which she actually does end up going back to school, meets them for lunch around 11:59 a.m.-ish, but doesn't stay there very long. She quickly leaves at 12:03. The friend she did meet then said she was planning on taking a bus to Regina, but the last time she's ever legitimately seen is at this restaurant that's connected to the bus station, and she allegedly left between 1 and 1:45. After that, we have no witnesses, no CCTV footage, or even records that she took a bus where she said she was going to. They could not find any record of her ever taking a bus at all. The police and a lot of her friends seem to believe she met someone online, which does start to make sense because she was making posts about wanting to meet new friends online, and she had been using Kik, which is notorious for pedophiles and weirdos and scum of the earth. But if that line of thoughts is to be believed, then a lot of people, including her parents, fear that she may have been trafficked, which is the worst possible outcome to have in this case. I'm hoping that's not what happened, but there really is no real way to know what could have happened to her. And this case is a little particularly weird. Like, it hits me in a very weird way just because we would have been about the same age when she disappeared. I mean, we're probably around the same age now. So, I don't know. Makes me feel a little strange hearing about it. The disappearance of Kayla Berg is one of those cases that is as bare bones as it gets in terms of any useful information that could lead to her being found. All the investigators had to go on was that her brother's friend claimed to drop her off at her ex-boyfriend's house in, I'm gonna butcher this, Wausau, Wisconsin.
Wausau, Wisconsin.
And that's pretty much the last time she was seen. Supposedly the building she was left at was a vacant residence, which makes it very unclear why she'd want to go there in the first place, or if she knew it was an unvacant residence. Vacant residence, you know what I mean. The authorities who investigated her disappearance have had no real reason to suspect foul play, but they also don't think she was a runaway. And just because there's so little evidence or so little to go off of, there really is no way to know what happened to her. And unfortunately, that's all that's really known about her disappearance, even to this day. Cases like Chloe Leverett and Gage Daniels always get to me because, yeah, disappearances are always depressing and very sad. But when they involve kids this young, it just sucks. It's not fun to learn about. I mean, none of this is fun to learn about, but it just adds a second layer of sadness onto it just because, like, these are kids, man. Doing that to kids. Chloe and Gage were living with their grandparents when the house suddenly caught on fire, and to this day, investigators haven't figured out what exactly caused this fire. Initially, they were searching for the 4 bodies, the children and the grandparents, but when the children's remains weren't able to be found, that's when they issued out an Amber Alert to look for them. And there's been no real developments, and the mother seems to believe that somebody set this fire in order to abduct her children, which is horrifying. And I can't really imagine what it must be like to go nearly 10 years, because that's how long it's been, after this fire, and still have no answers as to what exactly happened. Diane Suzuki was a university student from Hawaii who went missing one day after her shift at a dance academy she worked at. According to one of her coworkers, they had planned to meet up with her after class. Her friend said that she was waiting for her in the parking lot, but after 15 minutes of her shift being over, she never showed up. Blood was found at the scene, and while they claim they had a suspect, nothing has ever actually come out of that, or they haven't made anything public about that. And this case actually holds a lot of significance in Hawaii because it led to a complete overhaul of their harassment laws, and from what I've read, it made it so that stalking is essentially a harassment crime. Weird that it wasn't. I would have considered that a harassment crime from the start, but it's hard to tell if that would have stopped her from being abducted in the first place. But still, weird that it wasn't in place beforehand. No article I read was too clear about whether police or the family believed she's still alive. I think labeling it as an abduction sort of points it in the direction that she could still be alive, but it could really go either way. Her disappearance does still affect Hawaii because it was just a huge tragedy for them when that happened. I think a lot of eyes were on that situation when it was like actively happening at the time. And it's really unfortunate they still have not had any breakthroughs in terms of finding her or anything really. Johnny Joe Shields was last seen in the home he shared with his mother in Iowa. At around 2 a.m. in the morning, he was heard leaving the house, and then he just never came home. What's strange about his disappearance is that he left all of his belongings, including his pickup truck, which has led the Iowa Department of Public Safety to deem his disappearance as involuntary. And from what little there is regarding his disappearance, it genuinely sounds like he intended to step out for a few minutes at most, and more than likely someone just snatched him as soon as he left. From what I could find, they have no suspects or any motive as to why someone would abduct him, but they also have no idea what would have compelled him to step out at that time. What I'm thinking is that it could have probably been somebody knocking at the door, but at the same time, I think somebody would have heard the knock. I think his mother would have, if she could hear him leaving, then I'm sure she would have heard the knock. If he was asleep and that knock came and that's what woke him up and compelled him to leave, I feel like it would have been enough to wake up everyone in the household. But without any solid evidence, it really could be anything that compelled him to step out, and him stepping out and him being abducted could be entirely unrelated, or they could. It really can go either way. The abduction of Johnny Gosh, I'm really sorry if I pronounced that wrong, but his abduction has a lot of information attached to it, and it's like I said, it's a lot of information, but it really starts to get muddy in terms of what the parents believe, what the police believe, and just what the general public believe or think about. Again, this big handful of information. And this case can honestly be an entire video on itself. Whether or not I'll do that is another story, but I'm going to try to give what, from my research, is the information that is at least confirmed to be close to fact, if that makes sense. Johnny Gosh was on his paper route in the early morning. He was confirmed to be seen at the paper drop-off by some of the other paper boys, but they also saw him talking to someone in their car a little while after they all started to disperse away from the paper drop-off. The car or person he was talking to has never been tracked down by police, and from what I could find, no one has really seen that person or that car again. Johnny's father gets a call a little later on about someone not getting their Sunday paper, and that's when he decides to go out and just see what's wrong or see what's holding his son up. But the only thing he ends up finding is his red wagon, which he used to carry the newspapers. And it was particularly full, which implies he was taken before he could deliver any papers at all. So it puts his abduction very soon after he was spotted talking to the guy in the car. It's at this point where the rest of this information, to my knowledge, hasn't been confirmed or led to any major breakthroughs in this case. There was an instance of a man named Robert Mayer, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right, claiming that he had info on the Gosh's son and asking first for $10,000 and then for $100,000 if he promised to bring their son back. In those letters, he claimed that a drug dealer had their son, but police quickly stepped in and arrested him for fraud. The mother was particularly angry that the police did this because she genuinely believed Robert Mayer and thought that this would harm their chances of getting someone else to offer ransom to get their son back, or harm their reputation of paying ransom, something like that. I couldn't find any word on what the father thought of this, but a little later on, the mother also claimed that a picture of some boys tied up was proof someone had abducted her son into a trafficking ring. And while this picture was actually debunked as a game the kids were playing to see who could break out, really weird game to play, but kids are kids, I guess. But the thing is that what's interesting is that while most of the kids in that image were identified and they did testify that this was just a game they were playing, the only kid they could never find and identify to get a testimony from is the one kid she claimed was her son. And
There's a lot more to this photo, but I want to keep it really brief because this could go on for a while. Like I said earlier, if I went into every small detail, this could legitimately be its own video. Just on the photo alone, I could talk for like 20 minutes about all the stuff around that photo. Another claim that comes from Johnny's mother is that one night around 2 a.m., her son appeared on her doorstep and was now an adult as a few years have passed. He had black hair now, as I assume he dyed it, and he was also accompanied by another man who she didn't know. Her son told her that he had been abducted into a trafficking ring and had been released when he had gotten too old. While he told this, he would occasionally look back at the man to get confirmation if he could continue speaking or continue saying certain things or not. And she claimed that he told her he feared for his safety and was going to go into hiding. And after that point where he told her that and they left, she had never seen him again. The father's opinion is that this could have happened. They were divorced by this point, so he wasn't there to confirm whether it happened or not, but he isn't sure. And the police seem to believe that it was just someone posing as her son as like a prank that an evil person would pull off, I guess. Like I said, stuff starts to get really muddy as we go on and look more into that information. What is interesting, though, is that Johnny did have a bill passed in his name that would ensure that police have to help as soon as a kid goes missing. I didn't know that wasn't the case, but it's, I know the whole thing is tragic, but it is a good thing to come out of a really bad situation that could help a lot of other people probably get found a lot faster. And like I said, there are a lot more details, and I would encourage you to actually look into the case if you want to know more, because there's just pages upon pages of just little things you could look into about it. And who knows, maybe someone actually knows something. By the presence of a brand new shirt, you can assume that we are on a entirely different day of recording. Ostergay was a 9-year-old girl who left her home between the hours of 3:45 a.m. and 4:15 a.m. And when she did leave, she left with pretty much nothing but a book bag, some pairs of clothes, and a few other miscellaneous personal items. What's a little strange about her disappearance is that there's no real definitive reason as to why she left in the first place at all. Initially, police assumed her to just be a runaway, but her life at home didn't really align with what usually leads to kids being runaways, especially at that age. So they pretty much put that to rest relatively quickly. Asha had a loving family and relatives that lived across the street. She played sports at school, and she enjoyed going to church, which pretty rare for kids to like, but even so, it further cements the fact that she really had no reason to leave her pretty good life at home and school and church. So a lot of factors pretty much lead to them just not believing the fact that she would run away upon her own volition. Her mother even stated at some point in an interview that they didn't even have a computer at home because of how many times there were like cases on the news and things like that of people just luring kids through the internet to capture them. And so it starts to get really confusing since the investigators really do believe that the bag was packed ahead of time, which admittedly it kind of sounds like it was. Like everything around that sounds like the leave was planned, but there's just no reason for why it would be planned in the first place. She was spotted a little ways north of Highway 180 by a few people, one of which was a motorist who did actually try to interact with her and ask why there was a 9-year-old girl on the highway. But apparently as soon as she saw him approaching, she just booked it into the forest, which it's really hard to put yourself into the mindset of what was going through her head at that point, because if we're going down the runaway thought, which was already snuffed up, I know, but she was spotted a little ways north of Highway 180. I'm not really sure where that is, but that's what I've read. But she was spotted by a few people. One particularly is a motorist that did try to go and ask her what she was doing on a highway. But as soon as they got too close, she pretty much booked it into the forest. And that kind of brings more questions than it does anything else, because really, what was her end destination? Like, where was she supposed to be going? Or why did she run to the forest? But that really is just her last reported sighting. And that's what I mean, that it just brings more questions than anything else. Her book bag was found around 2001-ish, 26 miles away from where her town was at a construction site. And in this book bag was 2 items, a Dr. Seuss book and a New Kids on the Block shirt. The thing is, those 2 don't belong to her, and no developments were made after that, aside from just saying, yeah, we found these items. They don't belong to her, and that's it. Her mother does believe that her case was just not given the attention as other missing children cases would have been given because she was a girl of color. And, like, some people are going to try to deny that, but that's just kind of a constant instance of that happening in news and investigations. Like, it's an unfortunate thing that tends to happen a lot, and it really does make you wonder what could have came from this case if they really did give it the attention that it honestly deserved. But up until now, there really just been no developments as to anything aside from the 2 items found and the book bag 26 miles away. DB Cooper is a case that I think every single person breathing has heard about at least once. Like, a lot of this is just general knowledge, and although, like, yeah, the initial information about the hijacking is pretty straightforward, there is tons of information and theories out there that aren't too well known, and most of that is kind of just relating to what people think happened, what his motives were, where he is, if he's alive, a lot of things like that. And I think the reason most of those don't fall into general knowledge is because a lot of that is just conjecture. Because aside from knowing that he jumped out of the plane, there's a huge lack of like genuine concrete evidence of what the hell happened to him. On November 24th, 1971, a man identifying himself as Dan Cooper hijacked a Boeing 727 under the threat of having a fucking bomb on him. He asked for $200,000 and some parachutes in ransom, which today would be around 1.5-ish million. And he was apparently a super nice guy to the passengers and flight crew. He even allowed some of them to just straight up get off during the money exchange. So that's the thing that always really stands out to me, is that he was an extremely just nice dude about it. He had given them a destination, but on the way there, he just straight up leapt out of the plane and was never seen again. There's tons of speculation about whether he survived the jump, since the money was never really recovered. They did find some of it in some bits that had clearly fallen in the water or had some kind of wear and tear or weather damage on them, but a body itself has never been recovered, and so there's no real way to know for sure. And that's where a lot of those, like, the speculation theory come from about, is he even still alive? That's a big one I always see around. I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm keeping it brief. It's just because I really want to make a full video on that later on, so I want to just keep this as a footnote so I don't repeat myself in another hour half video, I guess. I honestly wasn't expecting 2 plane disappearances back to back, if I'm being completely honest. Before today, I never really knew planes disappeared like that. Like, I just didn't think it was that big of an issue. Like, yeah, I was aware of the DB Cooper case and like probably one other plane disappearance a few years back, but I just didn't think it happened more than a handful of times. But that being said, I'm going to absolutely butcher this. The Angola Boeing 727 disappeared on May 25th, 2003. The plane itself had been operated by American Airlines for 25 years before being owned by a company called Aerospace Sales Leasing. Daniel, can you throw that up so we have a name? The plane was parked at an airport for a little over 2 years, which garnered more than $4 million in airport fees. Again, I'm starting to realize how much I just don't know about airplanes or anything, because I didn't know planes had to pay fees for just being parked in an airport. You learn something new, I guess. There's some contradictory accounts about whether it was one man or it was 2 people who boarded, but it's pretty widely accepted that a man named Ben Padilla and John Mutantu were flying the plane. Again, that's what's accepted, but it's been pretty debated. While the plane was taking off and in flight, air traffic controllers tried to make contact, but no one on board had responded, and the plane was last known heading southwest over the Atlantic Ocean before disappearing completely. The plane, nor the people, nor any crash evidence have ever been found, but this is what I mean, where I didn't know planes could disappear like that, or at all. Because, I don't know, in my head, I don't know how someone doesn't just spot a massive piece of metal in the air. Like, obviously planes fly over 24/7 and no one really notices, but in my head I've always just thought that if you're looking for a plane, I don't really see how you can lose it. But I'm sure there's like entirely valid reasons why that happens. I just need to look more into planes and how they work. That's all that's really known about the Angola Boeing 727. I kind of wish there was more, because personally, this one sounds a little more interesting to me than the DB Cooper case, even though that one has more information, but we can't really pick and choose what has information or not, I guess. We're going right back down to extremely bleak and depressing disappearances. Not that any of them have been hilarious or, a big chuckle factory, but, admittedly the planes one were a little, they were a step above the extremely depressing ones that fill the rest of the list. But sorry, moving on. Christine Shields Wagner disappearance was pretty hard to find any information on. Like, it took me a few hours to just find what little I did have, because a lot of sites that I did found were either very bare bones in terms of what they were willing to tell you, or they charged you for information which I'm not paying for. So, if there's nothing in terms of description, that's pretty much why, because it was bare bones, and then nothing in terms of leads that I could find really produced anything. And what rabbit hole I did fall down was because of the name. I don't know if you remember, higher on the list or lower on the list, I guess. I thought that maybe there would be a connection with Johnny Shields, but that wasn't the case from anything I could find. But Christine Shields Wagner was last seen leaving her home on October 10th, 2016, and was just never heard from again. She left her purse, her belongings, her phone was turned off, radio silence as soon as she left. However, the car she was driving was found at a farm about 2 weeks later, but the case still hasn't been solved because not only is there not much information about anything, but she kind of just went off the grid as soon as she ditched the car, so there's nothing much to go into with it, unfortunately. Like the DB Cooper case, I feel like everyone pretty much knows about the disappearance of Amelia Earhart, especially because we learn about it in American history. From what I kind of remember being in school, I like 90% sure there's an entire chapter on Amelia Earhart and like planes and things like that. But same with DB Cooper. I'm gonna try to be very brief because her disappearance has tons of theories and conspiracies behind it that I'd like to tackle in its own video. She is, however, the first person on this tier that has been declared deceased. And like I said, I'm really just going to leave it at that because I think everyone pretty much knows about what happened with Amelia Earhart. Henry Hudson was an English sea explorer who went missing in 1611, making him the oldest disappearance in this tier. Wendigoon actually has a really good video on this that I think I'll just either link below or throw on screen. Daniel, if you could find a thumbnail for it, I'll probably just send it to you. But I might make my own video on it at some point, but as of right now, it's just not on my list of topics. It is really interesting, however, so I'd probably just toss you to go see that video instead. But I'll be brief and just kind of give a rundown of what happened. Hudson went on an expedition with his boat, the Discovery, ironic name, under the English flag, and was funded by the Virginia Company and British East India Company to basically go on this expedition. And the voyage was going pretty well until the ship became trapped in an ice in James Bay. If you know where that is, I personally don't. But they'd been on their expedition for a few months by this point and were pretty much just forced to stay on shore and survive the winter. However, once the ice did clear, a mutiny broke out and Hudson was left on a small boat with 7 other crewmen, including his teenage son. Don't know why you'd bring a teenage son, but I guess that's what people did. The crew that did mutiny left him with they gave him resources, but nothing that you could genuinely say was going to let him survive much longer out there. And Hudson did follow the Discovery with his small boat and the people that were with him as best he could, but I guess the crew on the Discovery got a little annoyed by that and decided they were just gonna pick up the pace and lose him. I don't know why you do that, but I guess. The thing that makes talking about this specific case a little weird is that a lot of the accounts on the mutiny and the expedition are from the account of a man named Abacuk Pickett, who was part of the mutiny. So after the mutiny starts and they leave Hudson, there's pretty much no like written information about what happened to him. But another thing is that a lot of that information is written with bias because, again, he's part of the mutiny. So you kind of have to take what he says with a grain of salt because he's writing it, again, from the perspective of someone who just wants to mutiny. But like I said, after Hudson is abandoned, there's just no entries about him, and Wendigoon has an entire video about that, so I'll just link that instead, but that's pretty brief on what happened. James Gray was an award-winning computer scientist who went missing on January 28th, 2007, after failing to return from a trip to scatter his mother's ashes. He had went on this trip by himself since it wasn't really meant to take more than a few hours, maybe a day at most, if he wanted to stay out there and kind of just give some time to grieve. There was never any distress call or beacon that came from the boat, and the weather was pretty clear that day, so no one really knew that anything could have gone wrong. The Coast Guard had searched for him with planes and helicopters and boats, but they never really found a body or a wreckage of any kind, like alluding to what could have happened to him. By 2012, on the anniversary of his disappearance, he was presumed dead. There is an award given each year in his name, which I think is a nice way to commemorate him and keep the memory alive, but it kind of is a bit of a mystery of what exactly happened to him because it seems like he just went out there, did or didn't scatter the ashes. That can also not be confirmed, and sort of never really came back. On December 7th, 1958, the Martin family left in the morning for a day trip to the country just to get some Christmas decorations. The family consisted of Kenneth, Barbara, Barbie, Virginia, and Susan Martin. Where they were throughout the day isn't too well known. Witnesses say they saw him at a gas station, then at a snack shop, and the last eyewitness report places them somewhere on the north bank of the Columbia River in Washington. They found some tire tracks leading off a cliff near Dallas City, and investigators just assumed they had ran off a cliff but never found a car of any kind. However, a few months after the tracks were found, Susan's body itself was actually found, and the next morning, Virginia's body was found. But what's weird about that one is that the technicians doing the autopsy believe that they found bullet holes in each girl's head, but the medical report didn't mention the holes at all and kind of just attributed their deaths to drowning. However, the other 3 bodies still haven't been found and are presumed dead. I think what kind of sticks about this one is just that the autopsy and the medical report don't line up, and so it kind of makes you wonder why it has the impression that it was covered up when the family itself is kind of inconspicuous. Like, they don't really have any political ties or anything that would give a medical report, give whoever wrote the medical report a reason to just disregard the idea that there could be bullet holes and to further investigate that. I think that's what trips me up about this one, is that they're kind of just regular people who seem to have, I guess, gotten caught up in something. That's the only theory I personally have from reading everything, but I might actually go into this one and make a full video a little later on, because again, this is the only one, this is one of the rare ones, even after researching and writing a script and everything, that I still kind of pull a tab on every so often, but we'll get back to that. The article directly talking about the Akil Island Village disappearance is hidden behind a paywall, and I'm not doing that, so I tried to scrounge up any information I could find. There's not too much on what could have happened to the abandoned village, but as of right now, all I could find is that archaeologists theorize that the Great Irish Famine is the cause of this village not existing, but again, I'm not going to pay a random website to view an article about it, so we're going to unfortunately leave it there. Maybe I'll come back to that another time. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann is a case I heard about when I was in high school. I don't exactly remember how I first heard about it, but I recognized the name as soon as I saw it. I feel like I'd be a little more surprised if someone hadn't heard about the case, since it's been dubbed the most reported missing person case in modern history, which, I mean, I'd be happy if if I went missing and my case was known and people were actively trying to figure it out, but I'd also feel a little bitter that it doesn't sound like that title is given out of, I don't know, respect, I guess. I don't know, when cases are given titles like this, it always feels weird, because yeah, it's good that this is a way to sort of get the case more out there and get people to keep looking and keep investigating, but also it feels like it's mostly just there for selling newspapers or doing newscasts about it and making it a little more fun to talk about, I guess. I don't know. It never sits right with me when cases are given a title like that, but if it gets somebody found, then it gets somebody found. I guess you can't really complain about it. That being said, there's a ton of information on this case, like all the theories, suspects, and the police even had the parents as suspects at some point. It's a very messy case too that honestly could take up an entire hour if I went into all of it, so I'll try to keep this one brief, because I definitely do want to talk about this one at length a little later on in the future. Madeleine was about 3 years old when she went on a vacation to Portugal with her family and some other family friends. One night, the adults put the children to bed and went to dinner at a restaurant no more than 200-ish feet away from where they were staying at. They even would come to check on the children regularly. However, at 11 p.m. when they came to check on the kids again, Madeleine was missing, and while there's a ton of suspects and theories, no one has been able to explain how she was abducted in the first place, or who did it, or what happened to her afterward in general. The theory I'm most familiar with is the one I hope is the least true, but it's the one that was also told to me when I first heard about the case. When I was first explained this case a long time in high school, again, I don't really remember exactly who did it, but they had told me that the going theory at the time was that she had been sold into trafficking, which, worst possible outcome for any case in general. That's the one thing you don't want to happen, but unfortunately, there's nothing else to really go on, because she was also presumed dead on May 4th, 2020. And a lot of the factual information kind of just ends there, because everything else is, again, just theory, conjecture, what people think happened, what could have happened. Benjamin Bathurst was a British diplomat who was traveling under the guise of a commercial traveler. Not sure what that means, if I'm being completely honest, but he was using a different name during the time of the Napoleonic Wars. Again, I'm not too familiar with the Napoleon stuff, just because I don't know, in history, it wasn't something I was personally interested in. Maybe I'll look into it and make make a video about something in regards to that. Not going to promise it, but sorry, that's a tangent. Anyway, but on his travels, he and his partner, Kraus, I assume that's how it's pronounced, they stopped at Prussia. These are a bunch of words I can't pronounce, but you can follow it at least. But so they stopped at Prussia for fresh horses and for food. The departure was delayed until around 9 p.m.-ish, and at this time, Bathurst spent most of it just writing in the room they had set aside for him at the inn. And when it was time to go, follow me very closely here because this is where it gets weird. Okay. When it was time to go, he left his room first and then went towards the chase or carriage. We'll say carriage. So he left his room first and went towards the carriage. And so, it's a stagecoach, but whatever. But point being, he left first, and then Kraus was following right behind. Not directly behind because they could not, he didn't see him, but he heard him leave. And that's when he got the clue to go. And so that's what I'm saying, where it starts to get weird, because when Kraus arrived at the stagecoach carriage, whatever we're going to call it, he, again, was a little bit just behind, just out of eyesight of Bathurst, but he heard him leaving. And so when he got there, Bathurst was nowhere to be found. And the case itself, like bare bones, is not very interesting, admittedly. It's more the speculation that it sparked that makes it a lot more interesting, because a lot of people attribute it to just sudden disappearance, and there starts to be like speculation of like, is it supernatural? Is it aliens or something? Like, what outlandish thing could have caused this man to disappear from leaving the room to not arriving at the stagecoach when there was a man literally behind him? So he would have been eyewitness to anything that could have gotten in the way. And like I said, that's probably the coolest part of this case, but the reality of it is a lot less fun, because the realistic answer is he was probably just straight up murdered, because at the time Prussia was really known for just kind of not being lawless, but just kind of not really caring too much if things like that happened. And what I mean by that is that his initial supposed death didn't cause any real panic, and people seemingly didn't just care at all until Kraus had went home, reported it to Bathurst's father and his wife, and they did actually end up finding his pants and his coat in 2 different places, which also is what led people to think that the case was a bit exaggerated and he was just straight up murdered, or that Kraus had some part in it, because again, how are you right directly behind someone without seeing them and not hear him being murdered or hear him go off the beaten path? It's never been explained just how straight and narrow this path from the room to the carriage is. Like, for all we know, it could just be a straight hallway and that he just magically disappeared, or it could have been you walk through a hallway, you go downstairs, you go through an inn. Like, they've never been specific on what the path is for him to disappear. They just, all I could find is that this dude was behind him and the initial dude is gone. And that's what I mean, that this case is a lot more interesting if you just pretend he wasn't murdered and something else completely different happened. This is going to be the first and only time where I'm going to be openly glad that a person went missing, and it's because I'm not sure if you could say that on YouTube, so Daniel, just in case, could you bleep that out and just put the word upside down, just right here, I guess? Yeah, we're going to keep going though. But the person in question is Wolfgang Schellmann, and he was a German fighter pilot whose plane crashed on the first day of Operation Barboza. I've heard of the operation in history class, but I'm not really sure the specifics of it. But apparently his plane crashed into another plane. He was able to survive by bailing out, unfortunately. But the issue is that he did land in Soviet territory and was captured, then killed. This one's weird because it's not much of a disappearance, and I don't know why it's on this list. So I assume him being dead is kind of just a speculation, or he's presumed dead or something. I mean, by this point, he's most likely dead anyway. But that's what I kind of meant at the beginning, that a lot of these start to really be argument, you could argue this doesn't really count as a disappearance at all, because no shit, he's dead. But we'll leave that there. Again, we're happy he's dead. Anyway, Lisa Marie Young left her home at around 11 p.m. on June 29th, 2002, and her destination was to just go to a nightclub with a few friends. And while there, a man approached her and her friend Holly to just invite them to a house party. They eventually join him and they go to a second house. And While there, Lisa mentions being hungry, and the man they met offers to take her to get some food. Holly eventually gets a call from Lisa claiming that the man won't take her back and that she's starting to get a little pissed off because, again, this weirdo will not take her back home or take her back to the party. And after that, Lisa is never seen or heard from again, and her parents report her missing the next day. I'm going to be very, very careful on my words right now, so sorry if I'm speaking a lot slower than I have the entire video. So Lisa was never seen or heard from again after that, and her parents did report her missing the next day. When the man in question was interviewed, all he said was that he couldn't tell her where her daughter was and that he was sorry to disrespect them. I have an idea why they didn't dig deeper, but they just did not dig deeper into him. And it's kind of known that his grandmother does sue anyone who sort of just talks in a way that implies that her grandson had anything to do with it or was involved in any way. And for that reason, I'm going to leave that there and just say he had nothing to do with it. The police also were criticized for how they investigated this case, and a lot of people felt that it just wasn't given the seriousness or care that it should have, which is kind of common with a lot of the one, not in this tier specifically, but as we get lower into the tiers, because I've already started writing those scripts, that'll kind of start to be a little more common where it's a criticism that that the police or investigators or anything just aren't putting the effort that people would expect them to for these cases. But that's a tangent for another day. But they were investigating it as a homicide and not a missing person, so that could be a reason why a lot of information just wasn't given out to the public, and maybe they were investigating it to the best of their abilities. I want to hope they were, but that could be the reason why that there's just not that much info on what they figured out, because they are hopefully still investigating it as a homicide. Who could really know? But again, for fear of an old woman, I will say nothing else. This is going to be a rare short one because not all of these have like the most information or all the information I could possibly want out of them, which is good because, you know, if all of these had equal information, maybe we'd be here for an hour or two. Maybe we're already here for an hour. I have not edited the recordings. That is Daniel's job. So he can drop a quick timestamp of how long he's been editing up until this point for now. But moving on, Richard John Bingham, 7th Earl of Lucan, mouthful of a name. He allegedly fled the country after he was accused of murdering his nanny, Sandra Rivet. His family and friends argued against this accusation pretty hard, actually, from what I looked into. But it admittedly was really suspicious for him to just straight up go missing, almost like he was running from a, I don't know, murder. But a body was never found. However, in 2016, he was declared dead because, well, you know, it's been 42 years by that point. He was almost 40 when he disappeared, so there's no logical way he's alive. Like, if he's alive, that's more of a modern marvel than anything else. Kenny Veach was a hiker who went missing on his second attempt to find what he called the M Cave. What makes this case really different, honestly, from the other cave-oriented disappearances is that it involves YouTube pretty heavily. Like it's not a joking manner. I just think it's, you know, it's a case that involves YouTube very heavily. You know, but point being, this stems from a comment Kenny left on a Area 51 video where he said he found a cave that scared the hell out of him, and other commenters started to encourage him to find it again and film his experience. He didn't end up finding anything, and that video he did post was super heavily criticized. And so because of that, he just said he'd give it another try, and after that, he never came home after that second try, and not even too much long after that, a full search was just sent to go find him. They did find where his car was parked and his cell phone near an abandoned mine shaft. However, they didn't confirm if they believe that he fell down or not, or what exactly they think happened. There's a lot of theories about what happened. Most of what I saw involved aliens or him finding a secret entrance to Area 51, which, again, that'd be super cool if that was the case. But there's also a pretty cut and dry explanation of what happened to him from a comment left by someone claiming to be his girlfriend. This one really relies on you just taking what's given. I personally choose to just believe that it is his girlfriend's, just so that in my head this case is kind of closed. But you know, it really is up to what you believe. But the comment that she left basically says that she believes he intended to commit suicide because while they did find his phone, all his recording equipment was at home, meaning he never really planned to record anything that day in the first place. So she believes that coming home was just never an option for him and that he left his phone somewhere to not be tracked. Some people believe her. I personally do believe her. And other people think that this adds even more weight to the Area 51 theory because of how squeaky clean it puts everything together in one little surface. But this is one of them I'm actually really interested to see what you guys think about it, if you have heard about it or whether you believe it or not. But we'll keep moving on. Rebecca Corian was working on a Disney cruise ship when she disappeared, and the last sighting we have of her shows her using the ship phone and just talking to somebody and appearing to be extremely stressed because of whatever she's talking about, to the point that a crew member actually approached her and asked her if she's all right. And according to that crew member, she said she was perfectly fine, hung up, and just walked off camera. Well, off security camera is what I mean. The family was very critical of how Disney handled their daughter's disappearance, and they felt like there was a lot of focus on trying to keep this out of the public eye as opposed to actually trying to find their daughter. And, knowing Disney, I could believe that. I'm not alleging that at all. There is no evidence to that. I'm just saying, personal opinion, I would believe it. But a journalist from The Guardian did his own personal investigation, and a lot of the crew said that either Disney and the authorities knew more than they were letting on, or that she definitely just went overboard from the crew pool, and that Disney had the video. It's a really icky case to talk about because like it really does it just involve corporate BS of people covering things up and whatnot. And if that video does exist, Disney has never provided it. And with no evidence or cooperation, this can really only go so far in terms of what you think happened. And her kind of going overboard from the crew pool is just what's the accepted thing in the investigation. That's just what the accepted theory is. And I'm not going to say whether I believe it or not, because I genuinely do not know what could have happened. I'm not substantially confident, for legal reasons, but I would potentially put money on the idea that it was covered up by a company. I'm really fighting the legal issues right now, but it's one of those where it really is just sad that someone's disappearance got caught up in corporate people being assholes, I guess, if that's the message for that one. I'm going to butcher this. The Faucet, Peru Boeing 727 is a plane that went missing on September 11th, 1990. After refueling at Keflavik, Iceland, the plane left around 1:16 p.m. but never arrived at Gander International Airport in Canada. About half an hour after it was supposed to arrive, 2 nearby planes picked up a transmission about a low fuel emergency and that the plane was going to land in the Atlantic Ocean. Authorities assumed that the plane would be floating in the water somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, or where the last transmission came from, somewhere adjacent to it so they could find it a lot easier. But they were never able to actually find the plane itself or any passengers or a sign of a wreck or anything. It's assumed that none of the 16 people on board survived landing into the ocean. But what's strange is that the path the pilots were on was about 100 miles off course from their intended flight path. And because of this, investigators theorized that the pilots either got lost and attributed to poor pilot planning or something along those lines. Because again, if you're 100 miles off course, that means something had went wrong, 100 miles ago, obviously. But with no wreckage found, with nothing else after that initial transmission, it's really just up to that theory that just poor planning kind of lost this plane. Jody Husentrut was a news anchor who was abducted outside her home in Mason City, Iowa on June 27th, 1995. Her disappearance was immediately investigated as an abduction because there were signs of a struggle outside of her car that morning, like a bent car key and her stuff thrown around, as well as other eyewitnesses seeing a white car parked nearby. There have been many attempts to find her, or just really any evidence that could lead to a suspect, or like I said, literally anything, but nothing has really come of it yet. And a retired state representative who was involved with this case suggested that her disappearance was covered up by Mason City officials, but it's one of those things where you can really just either choose to believe that and take it, or not believe that and think that they're still investigating it actively. But you would really hope that at least at some point something does eventually come out that would give a hint at what happened, because if this is an instance of it being covered up by city officials, then that really fucking sucks. Because what person was involved either in abducting her, any what, again, it's like the case I spoke about a bit earlier. I'm blanking on the name right now because I record these in different complete sets, but it's like that case I was speaking about earlier, where if a case is covered up and the person whose case is covered up seemingly has no political ties, no criminal ties, if they're seemingly a normal person, then that means that whoever did it is somebody important. And I think that is infinitely more terrifying than anything else in the world, if people can just do that and have it covered up. But for fear of legal reasons, I'll just leave that be. The Kaz 2 is known as the Ghost Yacht because it was found drifting at sea with a 3-man crew missing. The drifting yacht was first spotted and reported on April 18th, 2007, and the authorities caught up with it around the 20th. It's really iffy on whether, because time zones, it's really iffy on if it was the 19th, 20th, or 21st, but the 20th is like a good midday to just say this day. But what makes the Kaz 2 a ghost yacht is the fact that the boat was found near perfect condition. Like, save for one shredded sail, everything was near perfect. Food was on the table, the engine was on, life vests were still there, and even GPS was fully functional. However, a life raft was missing, but there's never really been confirmation that there was ever a life raft in the first place. So that you could take that with a grain of salt, maybe. They did find a video to help piece together what happened, and the official account of what happened is that a fish line got tangled onto the rudder, and then one man tried to untangle it but fell into the water. Then another man jumped in to help, and when that third man left the helm to go help the other two who were in the water, he was also knocked into the water. And none of them being very good swimmers, it's presumed they just got exhausted after a few hours of swimming and drowned. It's honestly extremely scary how that can happen. Like, fun fact on me, I'm terrified of the water. I would never go on a yacht, a boat, or anything. So the idea that like you could just go out there with a 3-person crew and just one little fishing line could take all 3 of you out is absolutely horrifying to me. It's terrifying. Like, cases like this are exactly why I do not do the water. And like, whenever anyone asks me, oh, how come you don't want to go on a boat? I'm going to point them to this because this is exactly why I will never go on a boat. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 disappeared on March 8th, 2014. This one I actually do remember being brought up while I was in class because my history teacher brought it up in the morning. Real depressing way to start my day because that's all I really thought about until I went home. But what can you do? This case is pretty well known, and it gets kind of tricky to talk about and explain the details, so I'm going to keep it brief and not really fall too much to conjecture. So, as Flight 370 left Malaysia and was heading towards its destination, it sent what would be known as its final communication 38 minutes after departing. It was tracked by a Malaysian military radar for about an hour before it was just fully out of range. As it was being tracked, Flight 370 had deviated from its original flight path and was instead heading westward, but the plane itself nor the 239 people on it have ever really been found, and they're sort of just presumed dead. Like, this one's weird to me because while I remember a lot about it, I don't remember what I remember hearing about it that one day in class is not what I found while researching. So it puts me in this little bit of a weird position where the information I know I think is incorrect. And so that kind of bias made it really difficult to find information on this because everything I found I just assumed was wrong because I have that initial bias of it ruining my day a while back in high school. So that's why I kept that one brief, just because I really couldn't figure out how to talk about that one. And even so, whatever is there is relatively brief already. So it honestly took me a good while to figure out what exactly I wanted to say about the disappearance of Michael Rockefeller, because while there isn't a ton of misinformation out there, what misinformation is there has led to the popular theory that he was eaten by the Asmat people of New Guinea, which I know is not true. Well, not know, because you can never really know what happens in these cases, but I personally believe that didn't happen. But we're gonna for now we'll just talk about facts. We'll just talk about what I was able to find. So what happened that day was that Rockefeller and his partner, Renee Wassing, were in their canoe after their expedition in that area was finished. Their canoe got overturned and their two guides swam for help, but didn't return. They didn't really die or anything. I think it was just going to be a while, so they just didn't return in time. But once it, again, had been a while, Rockefeller said he could probably make it to shore. I assume that line of thinking was because that's what he assumed they did and just didn't come back. But do keep in mind it was about 12 miles away. But he went for it and was never seen again after that. And I've seen a lot of videos relaying this message that he was eaten, despite the evidence for that kind of being circumstantial at best. But the more widely accepted theory by authorities is that he just could not swim that full length, and it was either drowned or no, not drowned, but he drowned, not somebody drowned, I'm sorry. But he either drowned or was eaten by a shark or a crocodile or some kind of native water eating human species, I guess. But the only substantial evidence to the claim that he was eaten was that a private investigator the Rockefeller family had hired brought them 3 skulls that he'd gotten from the Asmat people. And the Rockefellers never said what the verdict was, but they did pay the investigator about $250,000, which was coincidentally the reward for evidence of Michael's death. And honestly, there's a lot of videos disproving that he was eaten, again, for ones that I personally do believe. So I'd say look into that if you're interested. One theory that I personally find the most interesting is that Michael staged his own death in that moment and just lived among the Asmat people. Not much more credit to that one than any other theory, honestly, out there. But again, personally, one that I believe. I'll probably link it's a TikTok, admittedly, but I'll probably link a TikTok that I did see about this that I really like. It's from a content creator that I really do respect because he does a lot of history and things like that, and really good dude. I'll do my best to link it, and if I don't, I'll just link it in the comments when I do remember. Agatha Christie's disappearance is the first one in this tier that resulted in the person being found alive, which is fantastic because, you know, some of this list has been very grim and some of it has been a little chuckly, but it's good that we're on the right side up. People are being found alive. Anyway, though, Agatha went missing one night after kissing her daughter goodnight and then driving off from her home in Berkshire. I'm so sorry I fumbled that. Those are words I've never spoken before. But so at the time, her husband was out with friends and a mistress, which that part will be important later, trust me. But that's only important for the moment because he did not see her leave. And she went missing for about 11 days until they found her at a hotel in Harrogate. The police were able to vaguely trace her because they'd found her crashed car a few days earlier but didn't find a body. Investigators assumed that she took a train and checked herself into the hotel after the accident. What is interesting, though, is that when they did find her, she had checked into the hotel under the name Teresa Neal, which conveniently is the name of her husband's mistress. Now, she didn't say anything about what happened in those 11 days when she was missing, and according to her, she just has no memory of it at all. Many assumed that her husband cheating sort of broke her mentally for a short period of time, but it's never been proven or unproven because, you know, with mental health, things like that, unless it's really tricky to say like what exactly is a cause of a certain thing or what exactly, you know, it's a concrete science, but you can never really give definitive answers to things like that. It really just depends from person to person. She did divorce her husband for being a cheating piece of shit soon after that, but until her death, she never really mentioned the disappearance much at all. But from what I could find, the closest she got was vaguely writing about something similar in one of her novels, but that's about it. It doesn't really fit anywhere in like the timeline of the story, but something I found pretty funny while doing my research is that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who, if you don't know, is the author of Sherlock Holmes, participated in the search for her and was apparently a very keen occultist and tried to use the paranormal to solve her case. None of that ever led to anything, obviously, but I think it's pretty funny. Solomon Northup is a pretty well-known kidnapping, considering his book 12 Years a Slave ended up being adapted into a feature film of the same name. I haven't seen it myself. I really don't like watching slave movies too often. They're obviously always going to be super depressing. They usually almost always ruin my week, my day, my month, and just bring down my mood in general, so I usually don't watch them too often. If you have seen the movie, though, it pretty much goes over the story of what happened. Again, it adapts the book pretty well from what I've heard. But the story goes is that Solomon was born free in New York, keyword free in New York, but unfortunately while traveling as a musician, he was kidnapped in Washington, D.C. and then shipped to New Orleans to be sold. He was later free because, again, he was born free and you couldn't just do that, despite that whole situation being completely shitty. There were rules against kidnapping free African Americans and trying to sell them as slaves. Unfortunately, the people who did capture him never really faced any punishment, which really does suck because they caused him such a horrible situation that they put him in and they pretty much just got away with it. What's interesting about Solomon's case is that he may have actually disappeared twice in his lifetime. The first time was the kidnapping, but around 1857 to 58, there's no real documents or evidence of him anywhere. Like, he kind of just doesn't exist in that time period. There are documents that refer to him being alive around 1863, but that's the best we get, especially considering there's not many details on how he died in 1864. There's theories that he was kidnapped again, considering he was an avid abolitionist after he was freed, but historians argue that he wouldn't have fetched a good price since he was of old age. Extremely grim situation. I mean, almost everything involving people of color was grim in those times, but I don't know. My hope is that he just lived an extremely peaceful life off the grid and wasn't captured again, and just, you know, being the avid abolitionist, sorry, that he was. Also enjoyed a life that was pretty quiet. That's what I would hope happened, and that's what I'm just going to tell myself happened, because the alternative sounds extremely grim and depressing. I was very tempted to skip the Edgar Allan Poe case just because every time I tried to write some notes, I ended up writing a video's worth of it, half because the theories behind his disappearance are admittedly very, very interesting, and half because, you know, as an emo man, I like him as an author and I like researching him. That's just, you know, it's a cool pastime. Maybe I'll make a video later, or I might not, just because it's you know, as much as I do like him, that is a very, very overspoken about topic, and I'm not sure if I want to just make a video that everyone else has probably made and made better than me. But anyway, so Edgar Allan Poe went missing on September 27th, 1849, while en route to Philadelphia to edit some poems for a friend. He never made it and was instead missing until October 3rd. When he was found, it was in another person's clothes and he was absolutely filthy. He was delirious and couldn't or wouldn't say how he got there, but he did give a name, Joseph Snodgrass, who was his doctor and friend, but I assume mostly doctor. So Poe was alive for about 4 days and suffering from intense hallucinations the entire time and kept repeating the name Reynolds. However, neither Snodgrass nor Poe's uncle knew anyone named Reynolds or knew where that name came from or any real origins that would explain why this name is what he is spouting in these hallucinations. There are a lot of theories regarding his death, like alcohol poisoning, general poisoning, ghosts, kidnapping, forced alcohol poisoning, but the one I think is the most valid is that he had a brain tumor, because when his body was moved to another grave, his casket and skeleton sort of fell apart, and one of the people moving it reportedly heard something in his skull rattling around. Tumors don't really rot away the way flesh does, but instead they harden and they kind of just sit there. So it'd make the most sense, but this was never really confirmed or denied. It, again, believe it if you want to, don't believe it if you don't want to. You can kind of go anywhere with it. I choose to believe it just because it honestly makes the most sense, even if it's not the most fun theory to think about. Former Australian Prime Minister Harold Holt might be the highest profile disappearance in this tier and the only one that's been definitively said to be deceased. Holt had gone to Point Nepean with some friends for an event, and on the way back home, he convinced the group to go for a swim. The spot he picked on the way back was Cheviot Beach, which he claimed he knew like the back of his hand. But because the conditions looked unsafe, only he and another friend ended up going into the water. Holt's friend, a man named Alan Stewart, stayed pretty close to the shore because of these conditions. Not sure why you'd go into the water anyway, but so be it. However, Holt, I guess, decided to go a little too far and was caught in a riptide and eventually disappeared into the water. From what I could find, a body was never officially recovered, but it's just accepted that he died because, well, not many people can just straight up survive being caught in a riptide. I'm a little confused why Holt is on the iceberg, just because, yeah, they never really found a body, but there's not much mystery as to what happened to him. Then again, if that were the case, there probably would be a lot less entries on the iceberg altogether, so we're just going to take it as we take it. What I do think is a little interesting snippet for you is that Holt is the third Australian Prime Minister to die in office. Okay, well, not the most fun fact, but it's, you know, it's something you can bring up if the moment arises or if you're on a date or something. You know, little Snapple fact. I'm going to absolutely butcher this name, but I'm going to do my absolute best to not do it. The Angakuni Lake Village disappearance is one that has sort of an unknown scale in terms of how many people actually went missing, but also in terms of whether or not it actually happened. The story goes that in 1930, a fur trapper who was well liked in the village went to visit one day and just saw that everyone was gone. The food was gone, the shirts and furs were left in the middle of being sewed, and what's worse is that the dogs were killed, which You can't do that. You can't just kill dogs. No one was ever found, but the story pretty much went unnoticed until an article published on November 30th of that same year started to catch some attention, and this article was written by Emmett E. Kelleher, who stated that 25 people went missing, including women and children. After this article is where things start to get a little weird, because not only is the legitimacy of this article even existing start to come into question, but books start being written that include this article as like evidence or use it as examples of things, like Stranger Than Science by Frank Edward in 1959. And the reason this creates a problem is because now the information is a little different each time, and details are added, like there being empty graves, there being weird lights in the skies when it happened, potentially 1,000 people who went missing. And so authorities started to deem it as an urban legend, and even brought the fur trapper's account into question, because he got his fur trapping license the year he made that claim. And so after that, they started to question the legitimacy of Kelleher's article, claiming that he was known for making things up to sell a story, claiming that he's just a straight up liar. And this is one that genuinely just comes down to what you're willing to believe, because there is absolutely zero evidence to help prove that this thing even happened. But that being said, the evidence that proving this didn't happen is pretty much just saying that guy's a liar. Don't believe him. So it's whether you believe it or not, no one can really say you're wrong. So I honestly might do a separate video on this, because it's genuinely really interesting, and I think it would make for a good video to really look into the village that may or may not even exist. Last one in this tier, and thankfully so, because researching all this has taken a very long time, and I still have the rest of the iceberg to go, but small victories. That being said, moving on, Belle Guinness might be the second worst person on this list, being saved from the first, who is a literal but maybe after this we can genuinely put an argument to see which one of them is actually the worst human being on tier 1. I know I've said it so many times to the point where it might as well just be a drinking game, but Belle Guinness and her weird murder spree is worth its own video entirely. But at the same time, there's almost 40 people in this tier alone, so if I dive deep in all of them, we'd genuinely be here all day. So as I've said, again, probably more times than anyone cares to hear, I'm going to try to keep it brief. Belle Guinness was born as Brynhild Paldaster Storteth. I'm going to just ask my editor to throw that on screen, because there is no way I pronounced that correctly.
Brynhild Paldaster Storseth.
But that is what she was born as. And she got the last name Guinness after marrying Peter Guinness. So Belle is stated to be one of the most prolific female serial killers in history. She's attributed with 14 confirmed murders, but there's been speculation that the number should maybe be around 40 instead. After her first husband and kids died under mysterious circumstances, she remarried, and that husband also died under mysterious circumstances. And despite those three being on her record, she was never really charged with anything, and pretty much got off scot-free with their insurance money. Life insurance money specifically, if that matters. After that, she would buy a farm where she'd lure men over using marriage ads and the newspapers, mails, flyers, things like that. And she'd essentially just kill them and rob them. And this all came to a head when the brother of one of her victims said he was coming to investigate what happened, because you're worried about your brother. No shit, you're going to show up. And at that point, she had Ray Lamphere set the house on fire. And Ray Lamphere is probably one of the only men I would assume she kept around long enough, because he was sort of a farmhand, but sort of an off and on lover from what I would look into. But this is where things start to get a little strange, though, because it's presumed that Belle died in the fire because they found a body, but Lamphere claims that the body they identified to be her was actually a murder victim who they had decapitated and set up as like a fake death kind of thing. And the body they examined did seem to be shorter than she was, and they never really looked into the fact that it was missing a head. They kind of just took it as is, and I guess we're happy she was gone. But after that, she was never really seen again. There's no sightings or anything. So if she did flee, then she pretty much got away with it 100%. But it really comes down to whether you're willing to believe Lamphere or the autopsy. Personally, I'm in the camp that she fled the scene, since the body they said didn't fully match her. And like I said, I'll probably make a full video on this, but the simple fact that they were under the impression that the body did not match what they assumed her body would look like, or what the description of her body would be, that alone just makes me think, yeah, she got away, she escaped. But I'd love to actually hear what you think about this, because I know this is a well-known one, because I've actually seen this one floating around. This one's weird because it makes its rounds every so often, like every 3 months. She'll just pop up in my feed, like on Twitter or on TikTok or on YouTube Shorts. People will just start talking about her again, and then people will forget about her. and then out of nowhere she'll just start coming back up again. So I'm sure a lot of you have actually heard about this one, so I'm really interested to see what you think about, I don't know, what her fate might be, I guess. That's the final case in tier 1 though. Some well-known, some that are known but not too popular. This one, like I've said at the beginning, this is the biggest one in the iceberg. So I'm thinking that as they start to get smaller, I'll start to provide more information on each case and maybe put some more opinions out there, I guess, if that's what you guys are interested in. It just makes the most sense because, again, if they get more obscure as we go lower, then we're going to have to make these videos longer and add more content to each case. But we'll see how we progress from here. We're just going to take it week by week. Next week, we are moving down the tier to tier 2. So hopefully it's, I'm kind of, maybe it'll be grim. We'll see. Let's hope for something interesting at the very least. But that's about it. Later.